Good afternoon and welcome to another installment of Beresford Booth's weekly webinar series. My name is Todd Cook. I am a member of the litigation group here at Beresford Booth. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about promissory notes and why they're not your average contract. Now this is an in-depth topic and there's a lot to it. I'm going to talk more at a surface level. So if you have questions that I don't answer, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will be at the end of the slideshow, and I would be happy to talk over any questions that you have. A quick roadmap for today. I'm going to start out talking about what is a contract. From there, we're going to talk about what is a promissory note, how it differs from a standard contract, and then finally, briefly, we're going to touch on why does it matter and what is the value of having a promissory note. So from the beginning, what is a contract? A contract is just an enforceable agreement between two or more people. Contracts happen every day in our society. They're how business is done, and they are also one of the larger topics that are faced in our courts. So contracts are developed from a source. The source of contract law is typically what we call common law. And common law is a body of laws that develops over many years, that has developed over many years, even predating the founding of Washington State or the United States. And it is a body of law developed by court decisions. So the courts in the United States and the state of Washington have been grappling with disputes between people about contracts for many, many years. And through those court decisions, rules and laws have been developed, a very robust system that explains when a contract is going to be enforceable, what it needs to be enforceable, and how a court will enforce it. So the basics of a contract, and I'm just going surface level here, the basic elements are offer, acceptance, and consideration. So an easy hypothetical, let's say I own a used car. I offer to sell that used car to Bill for $5,000, and he agrees. So the offer is my offer of the sale. The acceptance is Bill's agreement to the offer that I've proposed. And the consideration is an exchange of value between the two parties. So every contract has to have an exchange of value. So here, the value I'm providing is the used car. The value that Bill's providing is the $5,000. And that's a basic contract. I think that there's often a misperception that to be enforceable, a contract must be in writing. Now, there are times in law when a contract does need to be in writing, but many, many contracts will still be enforceable if they are entirely oral in nature. And then finally, when you have a basic common law contract that has been breached, the remedy or the cause of action that you typically go to court on is a claim for breach of contract. And most often what you are looking for is money damages based on the other party's breach. One more point before we move on to a promissory note, just to be clear, a contract is an enforceable agreement that can cover myriad topics. It can cover just about anything under the sun. So there's employment agreements, there's agreements when you buy a house, there's agreements when you sell a business, when you buy property from someone else. There's many, many topics that fit under this definition of a common law contract. So what is a promissory note then? Now, promissory note is a contract, but it's a special subset of a contract, and its source isn't the common law. So it is statutory in nature. What that means is the legislature has passed a law. I'm focusing here on Washington State. So the Washington legislature has passed a law at RCW 62A.3, and that law governs promissory notes. It establishes the requirements for promissory notes and how they're enforced. Now, courts do apply that law and can add some common law on top of it, but the basic source of where promissory notes come from is the statute, RCW 62A.3 here in Washington, and that is part of what we call the Uniform Commercial Code. So the basic elements of a promissory note, I'll get into it a little further in a moment, but essentially a promissory note is a negotiable instrument, which is an enforceable promise to pay money that complies with the requirements of UCC Article 3. So it's not the same elements. It is, you need to meet the statute. You need to meet what the statute says a promissory note is. And if you do, then you have a promissory note. One big distinction between a normal contract and a promissory note is a promissory note must be in writing. That is dictated by the statute. And instead of being on any subject matter, a promissory note focuses on the payment of money. So it is often used as a money substitute. So think about when you purchase a home, you make a down payment, the bank pays the full purchase price to the seller, and then you have a promissory note with the bank where you promise to pay the bank back over typically 30 years. Now, when a promissory note is not complied with, instead of a claim for breach of contract, it's typically called a claim for enforcement of the promissory note. And it's often a lot more straightforward than a claim for breach of contract because it is a claim to enforce a promise to pay. So let's get into it a little more. The UCC, what is the UCC? So the Uniform Commercial Code is a uniform law. So there are a number of uniform laws where experts in different fields have come together across the United States and put together, what they call uniform laws, and they take to the states and try to get all the states to adopt them. The Uniform Commercial Code is one of these uniform laws. It is basically accepted in every state, and it has definitely been passed here in Washington. So in Washington, the Uniform Commercial Code is part of our statutory law. It is found in RCW 62A. I have here on this slide a table of contents of all the different articles of the UCC here in Washington State. It covers many topics. We're going to focus on negotiable instruments and promissory notes, but a couple of them that I think tie together a lot in practice and that are more interesting to me are Article 2, which is the sale of goods, RCW 62A.2, negotiable instruments, RCW 62A.3, and that's Article 3, and then secured transactions, which is Article 9, RCW 62A.9. And secured transactions are, think of a mortgage. It's the document that creates the security interest in collateral. So what is a negotiable instrument? Here in Washington, that is defined in RCW 62A.3-104. I have the basic definition up here on the screen for you, but the highlights are a negotiable instrument is an unconditional promise to pay a fixed amount of money, and an unconditional promise to pay a fixed amount of money will satisfy the statute if it's payable to the bearer or to order. The bearer essentially means the person in possession of the promissory note, and to order means it is the promise says, directs someone to pay something. So someone else is paying based on an order of the person who is issuing the negotiable instrument. Uh, it must be payable either on demand or at a definite time. And basically, there are no other undertakings or instructions. It's an unconditional promise. So there's really two uh, big distinctions in a negotiable instrument: an unconditional promise to pay or an unconditional order to pay. And a promissory note is an unconditional promise to pay. So let's talk about what a promise is first. It seems a little uh, self-explanatory, but the legislature likes to define things, and sometimes they do so in a helpful way. So under the UCC Article 3, a promise is a written undertaking to pay money signed by the person undertaking to pay. So that's where we know that a negotiable instrument and a promissory note must be in writing. There are no oral negotiable instruments, no oral promissory notes. And it has to be signed by the person undertaking to pay. Um, what does negotiable mean? So negotiable essentially means that the instrument can be transferred from person to person. This essentially makes a negotiable instrument like a substitute for money. Uh, Now, a normal contract is between two parties. They are the parties to the contract. It oftentimes has clauses that say it can't be assigned. So those are typically the parties to the agreement during the life of the agreement. Um, but a negotiable instrument typically can be negotiated, transferred among other people, and then the ultimate holder of that negotiable instrument or that promissory note exchanges it for money with the person who is promising to pay or ordered to pay. So I want to just give you a classic example that you're probably familiar with, and that's a personal check. So a personal check is not a promissory note. Um, it is an order. So if you see, I have a check here and I've circled the words right before where you write who the check is being written to, and it says pay to the order of. So essentially, when you're writing a check, you are writing it as the drawee. You're the drawer, excuse me. The person writing the check under the UCC is called the drawer, and the drawer is instructing a third party, a bank, to pay the person whose name is on the check, or the person that person tells them to pay. So a check is a negotiable instrument because the payee, the person whose name is on the check, can take it to the bank and uh, and enforce that order with the bank. The bank will either deposit the funds for them or cash the check for them, or they can negotiate it to another party. They can, sign on the back, sign it over to another party who that party then would become the holder, and they'd be able to take it to the bank and get payment. So that is a common form of negotiable instrument that you're probably familiar with. So that is a type of negotiable instrument that is an order. We're dealing with promissory notes. So promissory notes are a promise. In an order, someone else, a third party, the bank, is being ordered to pay. In a promissory note, the person signing it is also the person who is agreeing to make the payment. So a promissory note is an unconditional promise to pay a person named in the promissory note, or the person who ultimately becomes the holder of the promissory note. The person under the UCC, they call the person who is signing the promissory note the maker, and the person to whom the note is issued, or to someone that original holder signs the promissory note over to, sells the promissory note to, that person is called a holder. Now, in a promissory note, they're typically payable on demand or on a fixed schedule. So you will The typical kind of promissory note that you think of or be familiar with is a mortgage agreement. Promissory note is part of a mortgage agreement, and that has a fixed schedule, typically monthly over 30 years. So quickly, what are some common uses of promissory notes? I just said one, a mortgage, and another is for a large sales transactions. So something where a large amount of money is being paid, the person paying the money typically doesn't have all of the money, so makes a cash down payment and then issues a promissory note for the balance of the purchase price. So in the mortgage, there's numerous documents involved in a mortgage transaction, but they typically involve, among others, a loan agreement or mortgage agreement, a promissory note for the promise to pay, and then a deed of trust, which is a secure transaction document governed by Article 9 that provides the security interest in the collateral, which collateralizes the promise to pay. And then in a large sales transaction, there's typically an underlying sales document and then a separate separate promissory note, which is the promise to pay the funds due under the sales agreement. Now, with that description, you may be asking yourself, why do I need a promissory note if I have a sales agreement or I have a mortgage agreement? Don't those agreements themselves do the trick? Aren't they sufficient? Because in those agreements, the parties are agreeing to the exchange that they're going to make, the amount to be paid, and the consideration that's going to change hands. And so one reason why a promissory note is valuable is it's a distinct legal obligation. So when you have a sales contract, it's subject to all the normal common law rules for how a contract is enforceable, what kind of damages you can get for a breach of that contract. But the promissory note creates a separate unconditional promise to pay. So that unconditional promise to pay often is much easier to enforce in court. It's a streamlined litigation oftentimes because you have a very straightforward document. One person unconditionally promises to pay another person. You go to the court, you show the court that you're the holder who the maker has promised to pay, and you ask the court to enforce it. But beyond it having its own distinct, being its own distinct obligation, there are also at times statutory reasons why it can be better, such as different statute limitations. So a sales contract under Article 2 comes with a 4-year statute of limitations. A promissory note under Article 3 has a 6-year statute of limitations. So if you had a sales agreement, a transaction that is documented with a sales contract and a promissory note for the payment, and the sales contract is breached by non-payment, that sales contract breach of contract claim would be barred after 4 years if you haven't sued on that breach of contract. But the promissory note would still have 2 years left on the 6-year statute of limitations. So it can provide you, access to the court even after the sales contract is no longer enforceable. And then finally, a negotiable instrument or a promissory note is valuable because it's like a money substitute. It's negotiable. It can be transferred. The lender can collect the money promised to be paid from the maker, but they can also sell it. So if you've had a mortgage, you may have experienced your mortgage being sold to a different lender, and the person who you're making the payments changing. So it gives the holder of the note the opportunity to pass it on to a new holder and essentially cash out if they don't want to hold that note for the entire repayment time of repayment. So those are really the high level pieces of a promissory note that I wanted to discuss today. Uh, the UCC is intricate and in depth and complicated. And so I've just scratched the surface here. You very well may have more questions. And if you do, feel free to reach out to me. My number is here on the screen, and so is my email address. I'd be happy to talk to you. And thank you for joining us today.